Pan Africanism is more than an idea. It is movement, a spirit, and a call to unity among Black people of African descent worldwide. It is not confined to history books or political theory. It lives in the hearts, minds, and actions of those who recognize that our stories, no matter where we are on this planet, are deeply interconnected. Born out of struggle, Pan Africanism emerged from the shared drama, the shared trauma, rather, of displacement, enslavement, colonization, and systemic oppression. Yet, from that pain came purpose. It was shaped by resistance, by those who refused to accept the conditions imposed upon them, by those who challenged injustice, and those who dared to imagine a different reality for themselves and for future generations. Sustained by visionaries, scholars, revolutionaries, and everyday people alike, Pan Africanism has always been about more than survival. It has been about restoration, restoration of identity, restoration of dignity, restoration of truth. It calls on us to reclaim what was taken, to reconnect with what was lost, and to redefine ourselves on our own terms. At its core, Pan Africanism represents an ongoing fight, a fight for self sufficiency, for self determination, for cultural integrity, for economic empowerment, and for global solidarity among African people everywhere. And it reminds us that despite borders, languages, and the circumstances and situations that have constantly been working against us, there is that ever present ancestral thread that binds us together. And perhaps, most importantly, it is a call to action, not just to understand our shared past, but to actively participate in shaping a unified and empowered future. So, Pan Africanism is the belief that all people of African descent on the continent and across the diaspora share a common history and destiny. It is an understanding that although we may be separated by oceans, languages, and national identities, the threads of our experiences are woven together by a shared past and a collective future. It calls us to look beyond artificial borders, those drawn by colonial powers and reinforced by modern systems, and recognize a deeper connection rooted in ancestry, culture, and struggle. From the continent of Africa to the Caribbean, to the North and South America, to Europe and beyond, our stories echo a common truth in ways that cannot be ignored. Pan Africanism reminds us that the challenges we face, whether social, economic, or political, are not isolated incidents, but part of a broader, interconnected reality. And because those struggles are connected, we must come together and work together to overcome anything and anyone that tries to stop the inevitable. Unity is not a buzzword or empty symbolism, it is necessary. At its core, Pan Africanism is about reclaiming identity in a world that has often sought to distort, erase, or redefine it. It is about reconnecting with who we were before we were told who we are. And from that place of truth, it becomes about building collective power, power rooted in knowledge of self, shared purpose, and the willingness to move together toward liberation. It is not simply about recognizing that we are connected, it is about acting on that connection. The roots of Pan Africanism began with the transatlantic slave trade, one of the most devastating and defining chapters in human history. Millions of African men, women, and children were forcibly taken from their homelands, stripped of their names, languages, and cultural identities, and scattered across distant lands. Families were torn apart, communities were dismantled, entire ways of life were disrupted. Yet, even amid that unimaginable trauma, something powerful endures. What remained was a shared identity, not one rooted in geography, but in experience, a collective consciousness shaped by struggle, resilience, and an unbreakable human spirit. Though separated by oceans and generations, African people carried with them fragments of their heritage, rhythms and music, patterns and language, spiritual beliefs and ways of being that refused to disappear. Through acts of resistance, both seen and unseen, this identity continued to take shape from revolts and rebellions to the quiet preservation of culture in songs, stories, and traditions. There was and is a constant refusal to be erased. Survival itself became a form of resistance. Out of that resistance, culture and endurance, the foundation of a global African consciousness was born. A consciousness that would later evolve into what we now recognize as Pan Africanism, a recognition that despite forced separation, we are still connected, we are still rooted, and we are still rising and will continue to rise. 1900, the first Pan African Conference brought together leaders, intellectuals, and activists from across the African diaspora in London. It was a historic moment, one of the first times that people of African descent from different parts of the world came together with a shared purpose to confront the conditions affecting Black people globally and to begin shaping a unified response. It was organized by Henry Sylvester Williams, a Trinidadian lawyer and founder of the African Association. The conference created a space for dialogue, strategy, and vision. W.E.B. Du Bois, whose scholarship and activism embraced and emphasized racial unity, historical consciousness, and a global Black solidarity, played a role in developing the movement. Du Bois understood that the struggles of African people were not isolated within national borders, but a part of a global system that needed to be challenged collectively. This gathering marked more than just a meeting, it marked a shift in consciousness. For the first time, there was a coordinated effort to define a global African unity and to demand justice on an international stage. It was here that the seeds of organized Pan Africanism were planted, rooted in the belief that unity across the diaspora was not only possible, but necessary. The conference issued a clear message that people of African descent deserved recognition, rights, and respect as full participants in the global community. It laid the intellectual and political foundation for future Pan African Congresses and movements, setting the stage for decades of activism, resistance, and progress. What began in that room in 1900 would echo across generations, going into a movement that would influence struggles for civil rights, independence, and liberation around the world. Now, we've all heard of Marcus Garvey, right? But Marcus Garvey took Pan Africanism from an idea discussed among intellectuals and transformed it into a mass movement that reached the everyday people. Through his leadership and vision, the message of unity, pride, and self determination moved out of conference rooms and into the streets, into communities, and into the hearts of millions. As the founder of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, Garvey didn't just speak about change, he organized it. He built one of the largest global movements of African people in history, connecting the diaspora in a way that had never been done before. His ability to communicate directly to the people, to the working class, to those who had been overlooked and marginalized. What made his movement so powerful is that Garvey called for pride in being black at a time when the world taught the opposite. He called for ownership, encouraging economic development and the building of black institutions. And he called for independence, not just politically, but mentally and culturally. His message challenged people to see themselves not through the lens of oppression, but through the lens of possibility. His vision of global unity was bold and unapologetic. He understood that true liberation required more than individual success, it required collective effort. His message was clear and direct. We must define ourselves, build for ourselves, and unite across borders for the advancement of our people. In doing so, Marcus Garvey didn't just expand Pan Africanism, he energized it, giving it a scale, a voice, and a momentum that would influence generations to come. But of course, the American government did everything it could to derail everything he tried to accomplish. But in the words of Fred Hampton, you can kill a revolutionary, but you can't kill a revolution. Pan African Pan Africanism became more than an idea. It became a force for liberation across the African continent. What began as a vision of unity among people of African descent evolved into a powerful political and ideological movement that directly challenged colonial rule and demanded self governance. Leaders like Kwame Nkrumah took the principles of Pan Africanism and put them into action. Educated abroad and influenced by earlier Pan African thinkers, Nkrumah returned to Africa with a clear mission: not just independence for one nation, but freedom and unity for the entire continent. He understood that true liberation could not exist in isolation, that the independence of one African nation was tied to the independence of all. When Ghana gained independence in 1957, it was more than a cultural victory, it was a global signal. It marked the first time a sub Saharan African country broke free from colonial rule in the modern era, and it sent a powerful message across the continent. Liberation was possible. That moment ignited a wave of independent movements that throughout Africa, nations that had long endured colonial domination began to rise up, inspired by the example Ghana had set. The momentum of Pan Africanism fueled not only political change, but a renewed sense of identity, pride, and purpose among African people. It proved something profound: that unity was not just an ideal, but a strategy, a force capable of, capable of breaking the chains of colonialism and reshaping the future of a continent. Pan Africanism did not remain confined to the African continent. It also took root in the United States, shaping movements that redefined the struggle for Black liberation. It expanded the conversation beyond national boundaries and connected the experiences of African people worldwide. Figures like Malcolm X helped to elevate the struggle to the level of human rights, making it clear that what Black people faced in America was part of a global system of oppression. Martin Luther King Jr., in contrast, worked within the American system, pushing the nation to confront its own contradictions and live up to its ideals. But it was Kwame Nkrumah, or Kwame Ture, who fully embodied the transition from civil rights to global Pan African consciousness. As a leader in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, Stokely Carmichael, as he was then known, helped popularize the call for Black Power, which sparked an awakening and a conscious affirmation of self determination, political independence, and cultural pride. But his journey didn't stop in the United States. After traveling to Africa and connecting with revolutionary leaders, he embraced Pan Africanism Pan Africanism not just as an idea, but as a way of life. He took the name Kwame Ture, honoring Kwame Nkrumah and Ahmed Sekou Toure, symbolizing his commitment to global African unity. He dedicated his life to forging unity between Africa and the diaspora, emphasizing that Black struggles in America are deeply connected to those worldwide. Kwame Ture made it clear that the struggle of Black people in America could not be separated from the struggles of African people worldwide. He worked to build connections, to build bridges between the diaspora and the continent, emphasizing that liberation would require a coordinated global effort. His life represents a powerful truth within Pan Africanism that identity, struggle, and liberation do not stop at national borders. They expand, connect, and demand unity on a global scale. Pan Africanism is not just political, it is deeply cultural. Long before policies were written or conferences were held, culture was the first space where resistance took root. It lived in the rhythms of drums, in the melodies of songs, and the stories passed down through generations, and in the ways people found to express themselves despite systems designed to silence them. Through music, art, language, and spiritual practices, African people across the diaspora have reclaimed pieces of themselves that were once suppressed, distorted, or taken. Whether through jazz, blues, reggae, hip hop, visual art, dance, or literature, culture became a powerful means of remembering, of reconnecting to something deeper than the circumstances we live under. In environments where identity was attacked or redefined, culture stood as a quiet but unyielding form of resistance. It said, "We are still here." It preserved history where history was erased. It carried truth when truth was denied, and it created spaces where dignity and self worth could be restored. But beyond resistance, culture also became a path toward healing. It allowed people to rediscover who they were beyond oppression, to reconnect with ancestral roots, to find pride where shame had been imposed, and to rebuild a sense of belonging in the world that often tries to fragment that connection. Pan Africanism, in this sense, is not only about changing systems, it's about restoring the soul of a people, and culture has always been at the center of that restoration. Today, in these current times, Pan Africanism continues to evolve, adapting to a rapidly changing world while holding firmly to its core principles of unity, self determination, and collective advancement. What once relied on physical gatherings and printed words now moves at the speed of technology, connecting people across continents in real time through digital platforms, social media, and global communication. The African diaspora is more connected than ever before. Ideas, history, culture, and calls to action can now reach millions instantly, creating a new kind of global awareness. Barriers that once separated us are being challenged in ways that previous generations could only imagine. Movements for justice, equity, and empowerment, whether on the continent or throughout the diaspora, reflect the enduring spirit of Pan Africanism. From grassroots organizing to global campaigns, there is a renewed recognition that all voices are stronger when they move together. At the same time, the challenges we face continue to remind us why Pan Africanism is still necessary. Inequality, systemic injustice, economic disparity, cultural misrepresentation remain realities for many. These conditions reinforce the importance of unity, not as an abstract ideal, but as a practical and powerful response. The vision of Pan Africanism is not frozen in the past, it is alive, active, and unfolding in the present. It lives in the conversations we have, the connections we build, and the actions we take. And as long as the need for justice, dignity, and collective progress exists, that vision will remain not only relevant, but essential. Pan Africanism is not history alone, it is a living call. It is not something confined to the past, studied at a distance, or remembered only in moments of reflection. It is active, present, and calling on each of us in real time to learn and know our history, not just the surface level narratives, but the deeper truths that have too often been hidden, distorted, or left untold. Because when we know our history, we begin to develop a more profound understanding of the forces that shaped our reality. And more importantly, we begin to know better and understand ourselves, to look beyond the imposed identities this society has forced upon us by virtue of being captured, cornered, and corralled in environments contrary to our true nature, and rediscover who we are at our core, to reconnect with our heritage, our strength, our resilience, and our worth, to move from a place of confusion to clarity, from disconnection to alignment. It is a clarion call to stand together, not to allow borders, languages, social and economic standing, or lived experiences to continue to separate us, but to stand united in a shared understanding and a shared purpose. Because the future we seek cannot be built in isolation. It requires collective vision, collective effort, and collective responsibility. Pan Africanism reminds us that we are not just witnesses to history, we are participants in it. We are not just inheritors of a legacy, we are its continuation. The legacy lives on, not in theory, not in memory, but in us.